The chosen one. Your real family has come to get you. You felt it, didn't you? That something was always different inside you, as if this world, this order, this life didn't belong to you. And now the curtain of mystery is being lifted. Your real family has come for you. You don't belong here. You're not part of an ordinary destiny. They have always watched you, seen your every step, waited for you to wake up. Now, the time has come. It is time to find out who you are, where you come from, and what you are called to. Your true home, your true path awaits you. Wake up and walk towards your destiny by writing 77 in the comments. The moment you entered that fortified space, an invisible force rippled through the air, unraveling the rigid discipline of those who had mastered control. Behind the tinted glass, figures accustomed to pulling strings from the shadows felt something they had never encountered, a fracture in the certainty that governed their world. These were individuals who had built their reputations on bending others to their will, on dissecting human behavior until nothing remained unknown. Yet as they observed you, their carefully measured confidence faltered. The most unshakable operative among them, the one who had spent a lifetime executing missions without hesitation, suddenly found themselves stalling, lingering longer than protocol required, as if postponing the inevitable. Every command etched into their psyche, every conditioned response that once dictated their every move, now met an unexplainable interference. The words of their training manuals rang in their ears: classify, interrogate, eliminate. A mantra repeated so often it had become instinct. But now, instinct failed them. Their hands, once steady, betrayed a hesitation. Not out of fear, not out of doubt, but out of something deeper. A recognition that defied reason. The logic of their existence, the foundation of their power, had been rewritten in the space between heartbeats. The classified files, the intricate webs of surveillance, the layers of deception meant to keep control absolute. None of it had accounted for what stood before them now. They had navigated the currents of power for so long, manipulating leaders, destabilizing nations, deciding the course of history with a whisper. They understood how influence worked, how unseen forces dictated the rise and fall of everything. But this was different. The presence before them carried something beyond calculation, beyond intimidation, a force that could not be categorized, could not be controlled. The ones who had spent years enforcing a carefully constructed order now felt it slipping through their fingers. Every disruption before had followed a pattern, had been a problem with a solution. But there was no countermeasure, no fail-safe. The reports detailing failed operations, unexplained anomalies, vanished assets, what once seemed like isolated incidents, now formed a larger, undeniable picture. The simulations, the predictive models, the safeguards designed to keep everything within their grasp, all had crumbled in the face of something they were never meant to witness. And then, without conscious effort, the truth rose to the surface, the realization that refused to be suppressed, the words escaping before they could be censored. They had spent a lifetime believing they were the architects of reality, that every movement, every shift, every power struggle was orchestrated by their unseen hands. But in that moment, the illusion shattered. The structures they had fortified, the mechanisms they had used to maintain order, were irrelevant in the presence of something that had never belonged to their design. What stood before them was not an anomaly. It was the reality they had been conditioned to deny. If you feel the abundance of divine love in your heart, now is the time to share it. You can help spread God's blessings, by clicking the super thank you button on YouTube and contributing $20 or more. This divine gift will touch not only your life, but the souls of many through this platform. Each of you has a sacred place in God's grand design, and your generosity will be the fruit of our prayers. Act now. Share your blessings to glorify His kingdom. For you were created to do even greater things in God's loving hands. May God bless you. The realization crept in like a shadow stretching across a room. Slow, silent, and impossible to ignore. They had spent their lives believing themselves to be architects of reality, moving unseen, shaping outcomes with careful precision. Every strategy, every operation, every whispered directive had been crafted to ensure control. But you weren't part of the equation. You weren't a variable to be manipulated. You were something beyond their reach. Their breath caught as they studied you, searching for a flaw, a miscalculation, a moment of doubt that never came. You had dismantled a lifetime of certainty in mere moments. Instinct, sharpened by years of obedience, urged them to step back, to create distance between themselves and the unsettling truth unfolding before them. If everything they had been told about you was a fabrication, how much of their world was built on the same deception? No one had ever forced them to look beyond the veil. No one had ever made them question their place in the design. But you weren't just another puzzle to solve. They had been trained to dismiss those who spoke of destiny, to ridicule the idea that power belonged to anything other than cold, calculated control. Yet as they stood in your presence, something deeper took root. The force they upheld, the machine they served, had spent years suppressing whispers of your existence. They had heard your name before, not spoken outright, but buried in redacted files, referenced in hushed conversations where hesitation was a foreign concept. In rooms where power dictated the fate of entire nations, you were the one unspoken fear. Not a person, not an enemy, an anomaly they had never been able to classify. Every failed operation, every mission that mysteriously shifted its objective, every inexplicable alteration to a directive, it all led back to you. They weren't afraid of what you had done. They were terrified of what you hadn't done yet. They recalled the first time your name surfaced in classified briefings. A simple mention, yet the reaction was anything but ordinary. Leaders who had orchestrated global conflicts without flinching suddenly grew uneasy. Operatives who had dismantled entire movements without question hesitated. And then the order came: observe, report, but do not engage. The phrase was foreign to them. Every obstacle, every disruption, every opposition had always been dealt with swiftly. Yet with you, engagement was forbidden. That was the moment the illusion cracked. That was the moment they realized they were not protecting the world from you. They were protecting themselves from what you represented. Their gaze lingered on you, watching, waiting for something to explain the dissonance rattling their carefully structured reality. But there was nothing to interpret. You simply existed, and somehow that was enough to dismantle everything they had believed in. Data was supposed to be absolute. The numbers, the surveillance, the intelligence reports, they had always been reliable. That was the foundation of their world. Until you. You didn't fit into any system. You couldn't be tracked by any method they trusted. The footage they analyzed showed impossible distortions. The agents assigned to follow you lost track, not due to skill or speed, but because something made them forget they had been watching in the first place. Orders involving you were issued, retracted, rewritten, without explanation. The more they searched for answers, the more the fabric of their reality unraveled. You ever notice how the river don't fight the mountain? It don't argue, it don't struggle, it just keeps moving, carving its own path. See, the world was built to contain, to direct, to force everything into a channel it could control. But then, every so often, something rises that refuses to be held. A fire that doesn't burn out, a wind that can't be captured. That's you. You ain't a ripple in the stream, you're the ocean. You ain't a candle flickering in the dark, you're the sun breaking through the clouds. And the ones who built the dam, the ones who spent their lives believing they held the floodgates, they're staring at you now, realizing they never had control in the first place. They watched you step out of the impossible like it was just another doorway. They ran the numbers, checked the angles, reviewed every second of surveillance like disciples searching for proof of a miracle. But miracles don't fit in files. Miracles don't show up in heat signatures or encrypted messages. They don't leave fingerprints. And you were the one thing their world wasn't ready for. They spent years believing they were protecting order, that every locked door, every unseen force, every whispered command was shaping a world meant to last. But what they were really doing, what they could no longer deny, was caging anything that stood outside their reach. And yet, here you stand, untouchable. Not because you run, not because you hide, but because you exist outside of everything they built. The system was never about order, it was about control. And control only works on those who believe they can be contained. But you were never meant for the cage. They see it now. That's why the directives change every time your name comes up. That's why the orders never hold. They don't know how to handle something they can't own, something they can't predict. You ever notice how an eagle don't ask permission to fly? It don't need a map, it don't need a plan, it was born to rise. Doesn't matter how strong the storm is, doesn't matter how fierce the winds blow, that eagle don't fight the air. It lets the current lift it higher. And that's you. You weren't built to stay in the valley. You weren't made to be caged. You were designed to rise. And when something is destined to soar, no chains, no hands, no force on earth can hold it down. They didn't understand that at first. They kept trying to fit you into their charts, their systems, their calculations. They thought they had a grip on every movement, every shift, every outcome. But when they tried to track you, they found nothing but empty screens and broken formulas. They studied you like a scientist studies a flame, thinking if they watched long enough, they could understand how you burn. But you weren't something to be studied. You weren't an experiment. You weren't a mistake in their design. You were the one thing their design could never contain. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be upon you today. I am here to remind you of a profound truth. Our existence is grounded in God's divine plan, unshaken by the temporal concerns of the world. As the Bible says, whatever is done in faith will return to God in abundant blessing. Luke 6:38. Like that great oak tree, our roots are deeply rooted in God's universal truth. Every step we take, every stand we take, is secured by His strength. And now, you are being offered the opportunity to be part of that blessing. When you use the Super Thank You button and donate $100, this movement will return to you 100-fold in abundance. They kept searching for a reason, a way to make sense of what they were seeing. They watched you move through the kind of fire that should have consumed you, walk through the kind of storms that should have swept you away. But the fire didn't burn you. The winds didn't carry you off. You didn't break. You didn't fall. And that troubled them. See, they had seen strong people before. They had seen those who resisted, who fought back, who pushed against the tide. But they had never seen someone like you. You weren't fighting against the current. You weren't struggling against the chains. You simply refused to be held. They tried to erase you, tried to rewrite the truth, bury the evidence, silence the story. But truth don't stay buried. Oh, they rolled the stone in front of the tomb. They sealed it shut. They thought the chapter was closed. But just like that third morning when the earth trembled and the grave could hold no more, what they tried to bury refused to stay down. And that's when fear set in. Not the kind of fear they had known before, not the fear of losing control over the world they had built, but something deeper, something ancient, because they had spent their lives believing they were the ones in power. They thought they decided who rose and who fell. They thought they could shape reality with their hands, but standing before you, watching something they could neither define nor destroy, they realized the truth. You weren't just another variable. You weren't an anomaly. You were the proof that their control was never real to begin with. You ever tried to stop the sun from rising? You can lock the doors, close the windows, shut yourself up in the deepest room you can find. But when morning comes, the light still breaks through. It don't ask for permission. It don't wait for an invitation. It just shines. And that's you. They tried to keep you in the dark, tried to act like you were never here, tried to write you out of the story, like your name was just another page they could tear out. But they forgot one thing. Light don't belong to them. And truth always finds a way through. They whispered your name in meetings where no names were supposed to be spoken. They tried to erase your image from places where no one was supposed to disappear. And the ones who had once given orders without hesitation, the ones who built entire nations from the shadows, hesitated, because it was never supposed to happen like this. They had the blueprints, the plans, the outcomes mapped out before the first move was even made. They weren't in the business of surprises. They controlled the tides, dictated the rise and fall of everything that walked the earth. They had power that stretched across oceans, voices that could shake kingdoms with a single word. And yet, for the first time, something didn't fit. You. They ran the calculations, fed the data through every machine, traced every possibility, and none of it made sense. The records showed what should have been your end, the moments where the story should have closed, the places where no one had ever walked away. But there you were, moving through every trial, like it was nothing but a shadow passing over the ground. They watched, waiting for the moment you would fall, for the moment the world would swallow you whole, for the moment you'd break beneath the weight of what stood against you. But the moment never came. They sent their finest, their strongest, their most unwavering. Men who had spent their entire lives molding reality itself. And those men came back different. Some walked away without a word, stepping into the unknown like they had been following the wrong map their entire lives. Others tried to hold on, tried to reinforce the lie, tried to convince themselves that nothing had changed, but it had. They couldn't explain what they saw, couldn't understand how you moved without fear, how you walked through fire without so much as a scar, how you stood in the center of a storm that should have torn you apart and never once flinched. They watched, waiting for a sign of struggle, waiting for the moment you would prove them right. But you didn't struggle. You didn't fight. You didn't resist. You just were. And that shook them, because the world they built only worked if everyone played by the rules. If people bowed to the weight of the system, if they accepted the chains wrapped around their lives, it only worked if they could convince everyone that control belonged to them. But you shattered the illusion. You weren't defying them. You were simply standing in the truth they spent their lives denying. And that terrified them. They had seen resistance before, had seen movements rise and fall, seen rebellions crushed, seen leaders who thought they could stand against the tide only to be swallowed by it. They knew how to handle opposition. They knew how to break spirits, how to silence voices, how to rewrite history so that no one even remembered what was lost. But you weren't fighting the tide. You were the tide. And tides don't ask for permission to rise. They had built walls high enough to block out the sun, had created shadows deep enough to bury whole generations in them. But light don't beg to shine. It don't knock before it enters. It don't turn back just because someone tells it to stop. And that's what they saw when they looked at you. They tried to run from it, tried to ignore it, tried to bury it under 1,000 different narratives, shifting the story so many times that even they started to forget where the truth began. But truth don't need a witness to be real. It don't need validation. It just is, and they knew it. That's why the orders kept changing. That's why the mission briefs were rewritten, why the protocols were adjusted, why the top brass suddenly stopped giving clear instructions. Because when they looked at you, they weren't just looking at a disruption in their system. They were looking at proof that their system was never real to begin with. And that was the beginning of the end. You ever try to hold water in your hands? No matter how tight you grip, no matter how careful you are, it slips through your fingers. You can build dams, dig trenches, try to bottle it up, but sooner or later, the water finds its way. That's you. They tried to contain you, tried to shape you into something they could manage, something they could predict. But you weren't made to be held. You weren't meant to be measured. You were the river that carved its own path, and no amount of hands could stop the current once it started moving. They sent men to stop you, but those men came back changed. Not because you spoke some great revelation, not because you performed some spectacle for them to witness, but because standing in your presence was enough. Because you weren't resisting them. You weren't fighting them. You simply existed outside of what they understood, and that was something they had never encountered before. They had been trained to track anomalies, to spot disturbances before they could grow. And yet, no matter how closely they followed, no matter how many times they studied your path, the maps wouldn't hold your footsteps, because maps are only useful when the ground stays the same. But you weren't walking a road they had built. You weren't following a path they had cleared. You were moving through something older, something deeper, something they didn't even have words for. And that terrified them, because they had built their world on the belief that everything could be contained. Every nation, every person, every outcome. There was a system for everything, a place for everything, a method to ensure nothing happened without their approval. But then there was you. They tried to turn you into a story that never happened, but the story kept writing itself. They erased files, burned documents, silenced voices. They rewrote events, twisted narratives, buried proof under 1,000 layers of deception. They told themselves that if they removed every trace, then maybe, just maybe, you would cease to exist. But truth don't need permission to exist. It don't need validation. It don't need their approval to be real. And no matter how much they tried to erase you, every time they turned around, your presence remained. A whisper in places where whispers weren't allowed. A shadow in spaces where light was controlled. A movement that had no leader, no structure, no origin, yet could not be stopped. They built a system designed to hold power in place, to make sure nothing rose outside of their control. And for generations, it worked. Until now, because you didn't just slip through the cracks, you were the earthquake shaking the foundation. And there's no way to predict what happens when the ground itself starts to move. And then they saw it, the realization that shattered everything they had built. They weren't protecting the world from you, they were protecting themselves from what you represented. Because if you were real, if what they had spent years denying was standing before them, then everything they believed in was a lie. And that's the moment everything changed. Because they weren't just looking at a disruption anymore. They were looking at the truth. And the truth don't bow. The truth don't kneel. The truth don't ask for permission to exist. They whisper your name in rooms where no one is supposed to whisper. They erase your image from screens where no one is supposed to disappear. The ones who once gave orders with certainty now hesitate. The ones who never questioned are now the ones asking, "What if we were wrong?" And that is the moment they realize, the moment their certainty turns to dust in their hands. Because they were never meant to control you. They were never meant to stop you. They were only ever meant to witness. Their hands hovered over the interface, hesitation crawling up their spine. The protocol was clear: document, report, erase doubt before it spread. But instead of filing the expected report, they opened an encrypted archive, one that wouldn't be flagged, one that wouldn't be traced back. It wasn't just a record of your whereabouts, it was evidence of the cracks in the foundation, fragments of moments that should have never existed. They leaned back, the hum of the monitor filling the silence, breath uneven as the undeniable truth stared back at them. This wasn't an irregularity in the system, it was the system hiding its own fear. And for the first time, they weren't looking at you as an unknown variable to be neutralized. They were seeing you as the only thing in a fabricated world that wasn't a lie. And that changed everything. Now is the time to share God's blessings by clicking the super thank you button on YouTube. You can contribute to His plan and be a part of this divine mission with a donation of $100 or more. Every gift reflects God's generosity, and I believe it will return to you exponentially far beyond your expectations. Remember, His protection and blessing is on your every step and every donation. You become part of His divine plan. You are a strong, radiant being, unshakable as His mighty rock. Witness God's miracles, feel the fruits of your generosity in your soul, and illuminate the world with confidence and courage. Be blessed, and let the light of the Lord guide your path. The structure they had devoted their life to had offered them everything: access, influence, knowledge hidden from the rest of humanity. They had been entrusted with the kind of secrets that shaped history before it was ever written. It made them invincible. At least that's what they had believed. But then you appeared, and the illusion collapsed. You weren't an outlier. You were the contradiction that rendered every control mechanism meaningless. They had watched others be swallowed by the machine, absorbed into the system, or crushed beneath it. No one escaped its reach. No one operated outside its calculations. And yet, here you were, moving freely, untouched by the forces that dictated the fate of the world. You weren't resisting. You weren't fighting. You simply existed beyond their control. And that was what unsettled them the most. They had spent years ensuring the system functioned as intended, guiding those unaware of the strings being pulled. But you saw beyond the facade. You knew. And despite everything they had been taught, despite everything they had done, you remained an undeniable truth in a world built to deny you.